The soft glow of the kitchen lantern cast long shadows across Abigail Rossetti's flour-dusted hands as she kneaded dough with a fervor that matched her racing thoughts. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway marking it as precisely 3:07 in the morning in Beaver, Utah. 1878 too. Early, for anyone sensible to be awake, but sleep had become her enemy since Pa died. The rhythm of her hands working the dough was hypnotic, pushing and folding, the familiar motions bringing comfort when nothing else could. The homestead felt too quiet without her father's rumbling snores echoing down the hallway. 3 months since the fever took him, and still she found herself wandering the house at odd hours, searching for peace that wouldn't come. Outside, the desert night was cold and clear, stars pricking holes in the velvet darkness. Her small ranch house sat a mile outside of town, isolated enough for privacy, but close enough to Beaver's Main Street that she could hear the occasional shout from the saloon on nights when the wind blew just right. Tonight, though, there was only silence until the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke through her reverie. Abigail stiffened, her hands stilling in the dough. Visitors at this hour meant nothing but trouble. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved swiftly to the drawer where Pa's revolver was kept. The weapon felt heavy and cold as she slid it into the pocket of her apron, its weight both reassuring and terrifying. The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. Boots crunched on the gravel path that led to her door. Abigail held her breath, the pistol's grip now slick with sweat beneath her fingers. A gentle knock. She didn't move, hoping whoever it was would assume the house was empty and move along. Another knock, slightly louder. "Hello?" "Anyone awake?" A man's voice, deep but not threatening. "I saw your light. I don't mean any harm." Abigail hesitated, then moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. In the silver moonlight stood a tall figure, a man in a wide-brimmed hat, shoulders dusted with trail dirt, leading a tired-looking dun horse. He didn't look like an outlaw, but appearances could be deceiving out here. "What do you want?" She called through the door, not releasing her grip on the pistol. "Just passing through," he replied. "My horse pulled up lame about a mile back. I've been walking him slow, saw your light. Figured it might be an opportunity to rest him for a spell before heading into town." Abigail frowned. Strangers couldn't be trusted, but turning away a traveler with a lame horse would have made her father scowl from his grave. The desert night was no place for man nor beast in trouble. "Wait there," she said, decision made. She crossed to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it just enough to see him properly. He was taller than she'd thought, broad-shouldered and lean. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but she could see kind eyes and several days' worth of stubble. The clothes were dusty but decent, not the flashy attire of a gambler or the ragged look of a drifter. Just a cowboy, trail-worn and tired. "Madam," he said, removing his hat. His hair was dark, almost black in the dim light, curling slightly at the temples where sweat had dampened it. "Zane Matthews, I apologize for disturbing you at this hour." "Abigail Rossetti," she replied stiffly, not releasing her grip on the door. "You say your horse is lame?" "Yes, madam. Stepped in a prairie dog hole, I reckon. Nothing broken, but he could use some rest." She studied him a moment longer. "Barn's around back. You can put him up for the night. There's a pump for water and some hay in the loft." Relief crossed his features. "Thank you kindly, I'd be grateful," she nodded once. "Get your horse settled. You can come in after if you'd like some coffee." 20 minutes later, Abigail had resumed her bread making, though her movements were more self-conscious now, aware of the stranger in her barn. The coffee pot bubbled on the stove, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. She'd added another log to the fire, pushing back the pre-dawn chill. When a light tap sounded at the back door, She straightened her apron and opened it, gesturing him inside with a nod. Zane Matthews stepped into her kitchen, hat in hand, looking more exhausted than dangerous. In the lamplight, she could see him clearly now, a man of perhaps 30, with intelligent blue eyes and a strong jaw. A small scar traced his left eyebrow, and his hands were calloused and weathered. "Your horse?" she asked, resting. Nothing serious, but he needed to stop. "Thank you." His gaze moved to the counter where the half-kneaded dough sat waiting. "You're baking at this hour." Abigail turned away, uncomfortable under his direct gaze. "Can't sleep. Might as well be productive." She gestured to the table. "Sit if you like. Coffee's almost ready." He sat, placing his hat on the chair beside him, watching as she poured 2 cups of the steaming liquid. When she placed one before him, he wrapped his hands around it gratefully, but didn't drink immediately. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, his voice gentle. Something in his tone, understanding without pity, made her pause. She looked at him more carefully, seeing the shadows beneath his eyes that matched her own. "No," she admitted. "Not for a while now. Makes 2 of us then." He took a sip of his coffee, closing his eyes briefly as the warmth spread through him. "This is good. Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, the ticking of the clock and the occasional pop from the stove the only sounds. "What brings you to Beaver?" she finally asked, returning to her dough, punching it down with perhaps more force than necessary. "Work," he replied. "Heard the Caldwell Ranch was hiring hands for the spring drive." "They are," she confirmed. "Pa," she stopped, swallowed. "My father used to work for them sometimes. Good people." "And you?" he asked. "You live here alone?" Her hands stilled. "Yes, since my father passed, 3 months ago." Understanding flickered across his face. "That's why you can't sleep." It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it as one. Instead, she shaped the dough into loaves, setting them in greased pans with practiced movements. "Grief has a way of keeping company at night," he said quietly. Abigail looked up sharply. There was no platitude in his words, no empty comfort, just a simple truth, spoken by someone who knew. "Who did you lose?" she asked before she could stop herself. His eyes met hers, surprised by her directness. "My brother, 6 months ago, typhoid." "I'm sorry," he nodded. "As am I for your loss." Another silence fell, but it was different now, a shared understanding rather than wary distance. "The bread smells good," he said after a while. "It's not much, just something to do with my hands when the nights get too long." "My mother used to bake when she couldn't sleep," he offered. Said the rhythm of it settled her mind. Abigail nodded, feeling strangely seen. "That's exactly it." As dawn approached, they talked careful conversations that skirted personal details, yet somehow revealed much. He told her about the cattle drive he'd just finished, bringing a herd up from Arizona. She spoke of the challenges of running the small ranch alone, her determination to keep it despite the bank's pressure to sell. By the time the bread was baked, golden and fragrant, pale light was filtering through the windows. Abigail sliced a still warm loaf, the steam rising as she placed a piece on a plate for him. "This is fine bread," he said after taking a bite. "Worth being awake at 3 in the morning for." She found herself smiling, a small, rusty thing, but genuine. "Thank you for the company, Mr. Matthews." "Zane," he corrected gently. "Zane," she repeated, testing the name. "I should get going," he said, rising reluctantly. "Check on my horse, see if he's fit to ride into town." Abigail nodded, suddenly aware of how improper it was to have had a strange man in her kitchen all night, no matter how innocent the circumstances. What would the town gossips make of that if they knew? "Of course," she said, gathering herself. "I hope you find work at the Caldwells." "Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Rossetti. Not many would open their door to a stranger at that hour." "Abigail," she said, "and anyone would help a man with a lame horse. He smiled, a warm thing that reached his eyes. Not anyone, no. He settled his hat back on his head. Maybe I'll see you around town sometime. Maybe, she agreed, though she rarely went into Beaver these days, finding the pitying looks of the townspeople too much to bear. He paused at the door. If you ever need help around here, well, I'm handy with tools and willing to work. The offer surprised her. I manage. I'm sure you do, but everyone needs a hand sometimes. With that, he was gone, leading his horse down the path toward town, his tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Abigail watched until he disappeared around the bend, an unexpected feeling of loss settling in her chest. She turned back to her kitchen, to the remaining loaves of bread and the dirty cups on the table, wondering if she would ever see Zane Matthews again, and more surprisingly, hoping that she would. 3 days passed before Abigail ventured into town. Her supply of flour had dwindled to nearly nothing, and while she might have been content to let her own meals grow sparse, she had promised Mrs. Holloway 6 loaves for the church social, and a promise was a promise. The main street of Beaver bustled with the usual weekday activity wagons loaded with goods, townsfolk moving between stores, children darting between adults on mysterious errands of their own. Abigail tied her horse to the hitching post outside Whitaker's general store, adjusting her bonnet to shield her face. Not that it would help. In a town this size, everyone knew everyone's business. Miss Rossetti. Mr. Whitaker called as she entered the store, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. Haven't seen you in some time. How are you faring? Well enough, she replied, her standard answer these days. I need 10 pounds of flour, please, and some sugar if you have it. As Mr. Whitaker gathered her items, she glanced around the store, nodding politely to Mrs. Peterson and her daughter, who were examining fabric bolts near the window. The girl Emily, if Abigail remembered correctly, offered a tentative smile. Oh, and some coffee, too, Abigail added, remembering how quickly her supply had dwindled after sharing some with her unexpected visitor. Not that she expected him to return, of course. Heard you might have had some company the other night, Mr. Whitaker said casually as he measured coffee beans into a brown paper sack. Abigail stiffened. News travels fast. Small town, he replied with a shrug. Matthews mentioned stopping at a ranch east of town when his horse came up lame. Figured it was yours, being the only place out that way. So he had found work with the Caldwells after all, and apparently wasted no time in telling everyone about their encounter. Heat rose to Abigail's cheeks. He needed a place for his horse to rest, she said stiffly. Nothing more to it than that. Mr. Whitaker held up his hands. No need to get defensive, Miss Rossetti. Man spoke highly of your kindness, that's all. Said your bread was the best he'd tasted since leaving home. That gave her pause. He said that? He did indeed. Seemed like a decent sort. Caldwell hired him on the spot, from what I hear. Abigail nodded, unsure how to respond. She paid for her supplies and was arranging them in her saddlebags when a familiar voice called her name. Miss Rossetti. She turned to see Zane approaching from across the street, looking more respectable than when she'd last seen him, clean-shaven, in a fresh shirt, his hat pushed back to reveal his face in the sunlight. Mr. Matthews, she acknowledged, aware of curious eyes watching their interaction. Good to see you in town, he said, stopping a respectful distance away. How are you? Fine, thank you. She secured the last of her packages. I hear you found work with the Caldwells, he nodded. Started yesterday. Good outfit, fair wages. He hesitated. I wanted to thank you again for your help the other night. It was nothing, she said, glancing uncomfortably at the passers-by who were slowing to observe their conversation. Zane noticed her discomfort and lowered his voice. I've been thinking about your place. That fence on the north side looked like it could use some attention, and that barn door was hanging crooked. Abigail frowned. "Are you implying my property is in disrepair, Mr. Matthews?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Not at all. Just offering to help like I said I would." "I don't need charity." "Not charity, an exchange, your hospitality for my labor." When she didn't immediately refuse, he continued, "I've got Sundays free. I could come by after church, put in a few hours." Abigail hesitated. The fence did need fixing, and the barn door had been sticking for months. Pa would have had it repaired in no time, but her attempts had been less successful. Still, accepting help from a man she barely knew seemed improper, to say nothing of what the town gossips would make of it. "I can pay you," she said finally. He shook his head. "Not necessary. Consider it repayment for the bread and coffee. And the company," he added more quietly. Before she could respond, Sheriff Wilson approached, nodding to them both. "Miss Rossetti, Matthews," he greeted. "Everything all right here?" "Just fine, Sheriff," Zane replied easily. "Miss Rossetti was kind enough to help me when my horse came up lame the other night. I was expressing my gratitude." The sheriff's gaze lingered on Abigail. "That's so. Well, Miss Rossetti's a respectable woman. Lost her pa not too long ago. Been managing that place all on her own." There was a warning in his tone that made Abigail bristle despite herself. "I'm quite capable of handling my own affairs, Sheriff," she said more sharply than intended. Sheriff Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Course you are, miss. Just looking out for the town's residents, that's all." "I appreciate the concern," she said more diplomatically, "but Mr. Matthews has been nothing but a gentleman." The sheriff nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good to hear. You take care now." He tipped his hat and moved on, but not before giving Zane one last measuring look. When he was out of earshot, Zane turned to her with an apologetic expression. "I didn't mean to cause you any trouble." "You didn't," she said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. A single woman entertaining a male visitor, even innocently, was enough to set tongues wagging in a town like Beaver. He glanced at the son, then back to her. "I should let you get on your way, but my offer stands if you're interested." Abigail considered him, this man who had somehow slipped past her careful defenses with his quiet understanding and gentle manner. Perhaps it was foolishness, or loneliness, or simply the practical need for repairs she couldn't easily manage herself. But she found herself nodding. "Sunday then," she said, "after church, but I'll provide dinner in exchange for your work. That's my final offer." His smile was worth whatever gossip might come. "I accept your terms, Miss Rossetti." "Abigail," she corrected, surprising herself. "Abigail," he repeated, the name sounding different in his mouth somehow. "Until Sunday." She mounted her horse and rode home, feeling lighter than she had in months, wondering what her father would have made of Zane Matthews and his unexpected intrusion into their quiet life. Pa had always been a good judge of character. She liked to think he would have approved. True to his word, Zane arrived at Abigail's ranch the following Sunday afternoon, his sleeves already rolled up as he dismounted. She met him at the gate, wearing a simple dress rather than her usual work clothes, her hair neatly pinned beneath a plain bonnet. "Good afternoon," she greeted, suddenly self-conscious in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Afternoon," he replied with an easy smile. "You look nice. Church went well." She nodded. "Reverend Jenkins asked after you. Apparently you've made quite an impression on Beaver in a short time. Good things, I hope." "Mostly," she said with a small smile, "though Mrs. Holloway did mention that unmarried men of good character are in short supply, and perhaps I should consider that before turning away potential suitors." Zane's eyebrows shot up. "She said that to you directly?" "Oh yes. Subtlety isn't Mrs. Holloway's strong suit." Abigail's cheeks warmed. I'm not implying that you're that is. I didn't mean to suggest that I'm courting you." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "No offense taken, Abigail, though I can't say I'd object to the notion once we know each other better." The directness of his statement caught her off guard. "Mr. Matthews, Zane," he corrected gently. "Zane," she amended. "Perhaps we should focus on the fence repairs." He nodded, accepting the change of subject gracefully. "Show me what needs doing." For the next several hours they worked side by side repairing the north fence. Abigail had expected him to take over entirely, but instead he taught her how to properly set posts and stretch wire, explaining each step with patience and respect for her intelligence. By mid-afternoon, they had completed half the fence line and both were sweaty and dirt-smudged. "You're a quick learner," he remarked as they paused to drink water from the well. "Pa always said I had a knack for picking things up," she replied, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. "Though he didn't teach me much about fence repair. Said it wasn't suitable work for a young lady." "And what did you think about that?" She considered the question. "I think he was trying to protect me from a hard life, but intentions aside, it would have been more practical to teach me everything I needed to know to run this place." Zane nodded. "My mother had similar notions about what was proper for my sister. Then our father died, and suddenly propriety mattered less than survival." "What happened to your sister?" Abigail asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about his family beyond the brother he'd lost. "Married a shopkeeper in Denver, has 3 children now." A shadow crossed his face. "She asked me to stay after Robert, my brother, died, but I couldn't. Too many memories." Abigail understood that feeling all too well. "Is that why you came to Utah, to escape memories?" He looked at her sharply, then his expression softened. "Partly, and partly to make new ones, I suppose, start fresh." "And is Beaver living up to your expectations?" His gaze held hers. "It's exceeding them so far." The air between them seemed to thicken, and Abigail looked away first, flustered by the intensity in his eyes. "We should finish before it gets dark," she said, rising quickly. By sunset, the fence was completed, and Zane had also repaired the barn door, tightening the hinges and planing down the edge where it had been sticking. Abigail marveled at how smoothly it swung now, wishing she had asked for help sooner. "I can't thank you enough," she said as they walked back to the house. "I've been fighting with that door for months." "Happy to help," he replied. "Any other repairs needed doing?" She hesitated, not wanting to take advantage but also acutely aware of the leaking roof in the back bedroom and the pump handle that required increasing strength to operate. "Maybe a few," she admitted. "But they can wait for another time. You must be starving after all that work." Inside, she had a pot of stew simmering on the stove, filled with vegetables from her garden and what little beef she could afford. The bread she'd baked that morning waited on the sideboard, golden and crusty. It wasn't an elaborate meal, but it was the best she could offer. Zane washed up at the basin by the back door, then joined her at the table. He waited until she was seated before taking his own chair, a courtesy that reminded her of her father. "This smells wonderful," he said, inhaling deeply as she ladled stew into his bowl. "It's nothing fancy," she demurred. "Home cooking is always fancy to a man who's been eating his own trail food for too long," he replied with a smile. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the simple pleasure of a shared meal after honest work creating a sense of domesticity that Abigail had missed desperately since her father's passing. "How long have you been on your own?" Zane asked eventually, breaking the quiet. "My mother died when I was 16, she replied. "So it was just Pa and me for the past 8 years, until February." "That's a heavy burden to carry alone." She looked down at her bowl. "What choice do I have? This place was everything to my father. I can't bear to lose it too." Have you considered hiring help? A ranch hand or two? Can't afford it, she said simply. The bank's been patient so far, but if I miss another payment. She trailed off, the worry that kept her awake at night surfacing despite her efforts to contain it. Zane studied her thoughtfully. What if you could get a better price for your cattle? Would that help? She laughed without humor. Of course it would. But unless you know someone willing to pay above market rate out of charity, I don't see how that's possible. Not charity, he said, leaning forward. Strategy. Caldwell mentioned he's looking to expand his herd before the drive to Denver. The railroad's paying premium prices this year. Abigail frowned. I only have 20 head, hardly worth his notice. But those 20 are quality stock from what I saw today. Healthy, good conformation. If you sold directly to Caldwell instead of at the general auction, you'd cut out the middleman's fees. And if you timed it right, just before the drive when he's finalizing numbers. Hope flickered briefly before Abigail tamped it down. Why would he deal with me directly? I'm just a woman with a failing ranch. You're a rancher with good stock that he needs, Zane corrected firmly. And I could put in a word. I've only been working for him a short time, but he seems to value my opinion. She studied his face, looking for signs of pity or condescension, but found only genuine desire to help. Why would you do that for me? For the first time, Zane looked uncomfortable. Because I know what it's like to lose everything you care about. And because I think your father would have wanted someone to look out for you, even if you're perfectly capable of looking out for yourself. The simple honesty of his answer touched something deep inside her, a place that had been cold and numb since her father's death. Thank you, she said softly. I'd appreciate your help with Mr. Caldwell. After dinner, they sat on the porch as the first stars appeared, talking about everything and nothing, his stories of cattle drives through Arizona, her memories of traveling west with her parents as a child, the hopes they each held for the future. It's getting late, she said eventually, reluctant to end the evening but mindful of propriety. He nodded, rising from his chair. I should go. Thank you for dinner. Best meal I've had in a long time. Thank you for the fence and the barn door. And the potential cattle deal, she added with a small smile. My pleasure. He hesitated at the top of the steps. Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you properly sometime? Maybe take you to dinner in town? The question shouldn't have surprised her after the day they'd spent together, but it did. Call on me? You mean as a suitor? Yes, he said simply, if you'd be amenable. Abigail considered his request. She had never been particularly interested in courtship before her father's death, finding most of the local men either dull or dismissive of her independent nature. And after losing Pa, romance had been the furthest thing from her mind. But there was something about Zane Matthews, his quiet strength, his respect for her capabilities, the way he looked at her as if truly seeing her, that made her heart beat a little faster. I would be amenable, she said finally, the formal words at odds with the warmth spreading through her chest. His smile was brilliant in the gathering darkness. Saturday, then. I'll come by around 6 if that suits you. It suits me, she replied, returning his smile. After he had gone, Abigail remained on the porch for a long time, watching the stars and wondering at the strange turn her life had taken since a dusty cowboy had appeared at her door in the middle of the night, asking if she couldn't sleep either. Saturday arrived with an unseasonable spring storm, rain lashing at the windows and turning the roads to mud. Abigail had spent the morning cleaning the house, then the afternoon fretting over what to wear, only to realize as the clock struck 5 that Zane would likely not be able to make the journey from town in such conditions. Disappointment settled heavy in her chest as she changed out of her best dress and back into everyday clothes. She was being foolish anyway, getting so worked up over a simple dinner. It wasn't as if she'd never seen the man before. Yet the prospect of being courted by Zane, of being seen as a woman rather than a pitiful figure to be helped or an obstacle to be managed, had awakened something in her that had been dormant for too long. She was feeding the stove when a knock at the door startled her. Surely he hadn't, but there stood Zane on her porch, soaked to the skin, water dripping from his hat and pooling at his feet. "What are you doing here?" she exclaimed, pulling him inside. "You're drenched." "I said I'd come at 6, he replied, removing his hat and shaking water from it. "It's 6, but the storm is just water," he finished with a grin. "Though I'll admit the restaurant in town might be out of the question tonight." Abigail couldn't help but laugh at his bedraggled appearance. "You look like a drowned rat." "Thank you for the flattering assessment," he said dryly, but his eyes were bright with humor. "I don't suppose you'd consider an alternative dinner arrangement, perhaps here. I brought this in case." He produced a slightly damp paper package from inside his coat. "Wine, from California. Mr. Whitaker assured me it was a good vintage, though I admit I don't know much about such things." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. "You rode all this way in a downpour to bring me wine, and to see you," he added more softly. "Though I understand if you'd rather postpone." "No," she said quickly. "I mean, yes, let's have dinner here, but first you need dry clothes. Wait here." She hurried to her father's room, pushing aside the pang of grief as she opened the wardrobe that still held his things. Pa had been broader than Zane, but of similar height. She selected a shirt and trousers that might fit well enough for temporary use, along with a towel. When she returned, Zane was standing exactly where she'd left him, careful not to drip on anything but the mat by the door. "These were my father's," she said, handing him the bundle. "They might be a bit large, but they're dry." He accepted them with a nod of thanks. "I'm sorry to put you to trouble." "It's no trouble. You can change in there," she said, pointing to her father's room. "I'll start dinner." While Zane changed, Abigail busied herself in the kitchen, grateful for the bread she'd baked that morning and the chicken she'd planned to roast tomorrow. It wasn't the fancy restaurant meal he'd intended, but it would be warm and filling on such a night. When he emerged, she had to suppress a smile. The shirt hung loose on his leaner frame and the trousers were cuffed at the ankles, but somehow he managed to look dignified despite it all. "I look ridiculous," he said, catching her expression. "Not ridiculous," she assured him. "Just borrowed." He laughed, a deep, pleasant sound that filled the kitchen. "A charitable description. Can I help with anything?" Together they prepared a simple meal, moving around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease, as if they'd done this many times before. The rain continued to pound on the roof, creating a cozy backdrop to their conversation. Over dinner, Zane told her about his meeting with Mr. Caldwell regarding her cattle. "He's interested," he said between bites. "Said he'd come by next week to look at your stock personally. If they're as good as I described, he's willing to pay 15% above the auction price." Abigail nearly dropped her fork. 15%? That would be enough to cover the bank payment and then some. "I thought you'd be pleased," he said with a smile. "Please doesn't begin to cover it." "Zane, this could save the ranch. How can I ever thank you?" His expression grew serious. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad I could help." After dinner, they sat by the fire with glasses of the wine he'd brought, listening to the storm rage outside. The wine was sweet and strong, warming Abigail from the inside as the fire warmed her from without. "Tell me about your brother," she said suddenly. "The one you lost." Zane's hand stilled on his glass. For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "Robert was 4 years older than me. Smartest man I ever knew. Could read Latin and Greek, studied law in Boston. He was going to be something important someday, a judge, maybe, or a politician. A sad smile crossed his face. He was the one with all the dreams. I was just the younger brother who followed him around. You loved him very much, Abigail observed. I did. Everyone did. That was Robert's gift, making people love him. He took a long sip of wine. When he got sick, it happened so fast. One day he was fine, the next he was burning with fever. 3 days later he was gone, just like that. I'm sorry, she said, the words inadequate but sincere. What about your father? He asked after a moment. What kind of man was he? Abigail looked into the fire, gathering her thoughts. Strong, stubborn, kind, though he didn't always show it in ways others understood. He believed in hard work and honesty above all else. She smiled at a memory. He used to say that a person's word was the only thing that couldn't be taken away, so it should never be given lightly. Sounds like a wise man. He was. Hard-headed sometimes, especially when it came to me. Worried constantly that something would happen to me after we lost my mother. She sighed. I think he would have married me off to the first decent man who asked, just to know I'd be provided for after he was gone. And what would you have thought about that? She met his gaze. I would have refused. I didn't want a marriage of convenience or security. I wanted. She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. What did you want? He prompted gently. What every foolish young woman wants, I suppose. Love, partnership, someone who sees me as I am, not as they wish me to be. The intensity in his eyes made her look away. Not so foolish, he said softly. I want those things too. The air between them seemed to thicken again, charged with unspoken possibilities. Abigail rose abruptly, gathering their empty glasses. It's getting late, she said, and the storm isn't letting up. You should stay. When his eyebrows rose, she quickly added, in my father's room, I mean. It wouldn't be safe to ride back to town in this weather. If you're sure, he said cautiously, I wouldn't want to compromise your reputation. She smiled wryly. I think we're well past that, Mr. Matthews. Besides, no one will know. And if they did, well, Beaver will always find something to gossip about. Later, as Abigail lay in her bed listening to the rain and the occasional creak of floorboards from her father's room across the hall, she found herself smiling into the darkness. For the first time since Pa died, the empty house didn't feel quite so lonely, and the future didn't seem quite so bleak. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to Abigail's life. True to his word, Mr. Caldwell came to inspect her cattle and offered a fair price, even better than Zane had initially suggested. The sale would take place just before the drive to Denver in June, giving Abigail enough time to fatten the animals further and increase their value. Meanwhile, Zane continued to call on her every Sunday after church, helping with repairs around the ranch and staying for dinner. Their courtship progressed slowly but steadily, each visit deepening their understanding of one another. On a warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zane took her hand in his. I've been thinking, he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. After the cattle drive, I'll have enough saved to buy a small place of my own. Nothing fancy, but a start. Abigail's heart quickened. That's wonderful. You deserve it. He turned to face her fully. The thing is, I can't imagine building that life without you in it. She stared at him, hardly daring to believe what he seemed to be suggesting. Zane, I know it hasn't been that long, he continued, and maybe I'm being presumptuous, but I've never met anyone like you, Abigail. You're strong and kind and beautiful, and every day I spend with you makes me want 100 more. Tears pricked at her eyes. Are you asking what I think you're asking? He smiled, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small velvet pouch. From it, He produced a simple gold band set with a single modest pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Not very grand, but it's perfect," she breathed. "Abigail Rossetti," he said, voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need protection or security, but because I love you and want to build a life with you as equal partners in everything." The tears spilled over then, trailing down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and promising a seal on the future they would forge together. The wedding was held in late August, after the cattle drive had returned and the summer heat had begun to wane. The small church in Beaver was filled with well-wishers, many of whom had initially been skeptical of the match, but had come to recognize the genuine affection between the couple. Mrs. Holloway, naturally, took credit for the entire arrangement. "I told her not to turn away suitable suitors," she whispered loudly to anyone who would listen. "A woman needs a good man, especially one as capable as Mr. Matthews." Sheriff Wilson, more perceptive than many gave him credit for, offered Zane a handshake and Abigail a rare smile. "Your father would have approved," he told her. "Matthews is a good man." The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, which had undergone a transformation under their combined efforts. New paint brightened the house, the fences stood straight and strong, and the garden had expanded to include flowers as well as vegetables. It wasn't a grand estate, but it was theirs, and it was flourishing. As evening fell and the last guests departed, Abigail and Zane stood arm in arm on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Very," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I was thinking about that first night when you knocked on my door. When you nearly shot me for disturbing your bread-making," she laughed. "I wasn't going to shoot you. But yes, that night, if your horse hadn't gone lame, if I hadn't been awake baking bread at 3 in the morning. We would have found each other somehow," he said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be." She turned in his arms to look up at him. "I didn't believe in meant to be before I met you. And now I think maybe there's something to it after all." She smiled, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had appeared when she needed him most, though she hadn't known it then. Later that night, as they lay together in what was now their bedroom, Abigail traced the contours of his face with gentle fingers. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she whispered. "After Pa died, it was like all the light went out of the world." Zane caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I know. I felt the same after Robert, like there was no point to any of it anymore. And now I see that grief doesn't have to be the end of joy. It can be the beginning of something new if you're brave enough to let it." She nestled closer to him, her head on his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. "We'll have sorrows again someday," she murmured, the reality of life's impermanence never far from her thoughts. "We will," he agreed, "but we'll face them together. And we'll have joy too, so much joy, Abigail, I promise you that." As sleep claimed her, Abigail thought of all the nights she had lain awake, needing dough to quiet her troubled mind, never imagining that her sleeplessness would lead her to this moment, to this man, to this love that had blossomed from the most unexpected of meetings. 5 years later, Abigail stood at the kitchen window, watching as Zane taught their 3-year-old son, James, to feed the chickens. The little boy's laughter carried across the yard as he scattered feed with more enthusiasm than accuracy, sending the hens scrambling in all directions. Their daughter, Elizabeth, not yet a year old, slept peacefully in her cradle by the stove, her tiny fists curled against her round cheeks. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's determined chin, a combination that promised both beauty and strength as she grew. In the years since their wedding, the ranch had prospered beyond Abigail's most optimistic hopes. The small herd had tripled in size, and the addition of several dairy cows provided a steady income from butter and cheese sold in town. A new barn stood where the old one had been, larger and sturdier. With room for the draft horses, Zane had acquired to help with the heavier work. The house, too, had expanded, with 2 new bedrooms added for the children and a proper sitting room where before there had only been the kitchen and 2 small sleeping chambers. It wasn't grand by any means, but it was comfortable and warm, a true home for their growing family. Abigail smiled as James abandoned the chicken feeding to chase after his father, who was heading toward the barn. At 3, the boy was already determined to be involved in every aspect of ranch work, insisting on helping with tasks far beyond his capabilities, but learning rapidly nonetheless. She turned back to her bread making, her hands working the dough with practiced ease. It was midday now, not 3 in the morning, and she slept soundly most nights with Zane's arm draped protectively around her waist. But she still found peace in the ritual of baking, in the simple transformation of flour and water into something that would nourish those she loved. The sound of a horse approaching drew her attention back to the window. A rider was coming up the path, Sheriff Wilson, she realized as he came closer. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door, a flicker of concern rising despite the routine nature of the sheriff's occasional visits. "Afternoon, Mrs. Matthews," he greeted, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Sheriff Wilson," she replied with a nod. "What brings you out this way?" "Can I offer you some coffee?" "Coffee would be welcome, thank you." He followed her inside, removing his hat and glancing appreciatively around the tidy kitchen. "Place looks good. You two have done wonders with it." "We've been blessed," she said simply, placing a cup before him. "Is everything all right in town?" The sheriff took a sip before answering. "Mostly. Had some trouble with cattle rustlers over near Minersville last month. Nothing serious yet, but thought you should know to keep an eye out." Abigail frowned. "I appreciate the warning. I'll tell Zane." "No need," came her husband's voice from the doorway. "I heard." He entered with James perched on his shoulders, the boy's small hands tangled in his father's hair for balance. "Down you go, partner. Go check on your sister for me." James scrambled down and ran to the cradle, peering in with exaggerated caution that made both adults smile despite the serious conversation. Zane shook the sheriff's hand. "Any particular outfit we should be watching for?" "Nothing definite yet. Just some missing cattle and reports of strangers in the area." Wilson's gaze shifted to the children, then back to Zane with meaning. "Might be worth keeping your rifle loaded for a while." The implication was clear. Families with young children were vulnerable in ways bachelor ranchers were not. Abigail felt a chill despite the warm day. "We'll be careful," Zane assured him. "Thanks for the heads up." After the sheriff had gone, Abigail busied herself finishing the bread, trying to dismiss the uneasiness his visit had stirred. Zane noticed, as he always did when something troubled her. "It's probably nothing," he said, coming to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Just some drifters passing through." "Probably," she agreed, leaning back against him, "but we should still be cautious." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Always. Nothing's more important than keeping you and the children safe." That night, after the children were asleep, Abigail and Zane sat at the kitchen table discussing the sheriff's warning more openly. "I'll ride the boundaries tomorrow," Zane said, marking a route on the rough map he'd drawn of their property. "Check for any signs of trespassers. Maybe mend that section of fence in the south pasture while I'm at it." Abigail nodded. "I can come with you, Mrs. Peterson said she'd watch the children any time we needed." "No need to trouble her," Zane replied. You stay here with James and Elizabeth. I won't be gone long. Zane Matthews, she said firmly. We agreed to be partners in everything. That includes protecting what's ours. He looked up, startled by her tone, then his expression softened into a rueful smile. You're right, partners, though one of us should stay with the children. We'll take turns then, you tomorrow, me the day after. He reached across the table to take her hand. Have I told you lately how lucky I am to have found you? Not since this morning, she teased. Well, I am. Luckiest man in Utah territory. His thumb brushed over her wedding ring, the pearl gleaming softly in the lamplight. When I rode into Beaver that night, I never imagined that you'd end up married to a woman who bakes bread at ungodly hours, he laughed. That I'd find everything I never knew I was looking for. Later, as they prepared for bed, Abigail found herself drawn to the window. The night was clear, stars scattered across the black velvet of the sky like diamond dust. The ranch lay peaceful in the moonlight, the new barn a solid shadow against the horizon, the corral where James had taken his first steps outlined in silver. Penny for your thoughts, Zane said, coming to stand beside her. I was just thinking about how much has changed in 5 years, she replied, and how much has stayed the same. Oh, changed this place, us, our family, she smiled up at him. The same the stars, the land. The way my heart still skips when you walk into a room. He drew her into his arms. Mine too. Every time. Over the next week, they took turns riding the boundaries of their property, checking for signs of intruders and mending fences where needed. There was nothing to indicate that rustlers had targeted their land specifically, but the precaution gave them peace of mind. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythm: morning chores, meals shared around the kitchen table, evenings spent reading or talking while the children slept. James continued his enthusiastic helping, and Elizabeth began pulling herself up on furniture, determined to walk before her time. Then, on a cool September night, Abigail woke suddenly, unsure what had disturbed her sleep. Beside her, Zane slumbered peacefully, one arm thrown above his head. She lay still, listening. There a sound outside, metal against metal, not loud but distinct in the quiet night. She touched Zane's shoulder. Wake up, she whispered urgently. He came awake instantly, years of trail work having taught him to transition from sleep to alertness in seconds. What is it? There's someone outside. I heard something by the corral. Without hesitation, Zane slipped from the bed and pulled on his trousers. The rifle that normally hung above the mantel was already propped in the corner of their bedroom, loaded as the sheriff had suggested. Stay with the children, he said, checking the weapon with practiced hands. Lock the door behind me. Zane, I'll be careful, he promised, pressing a quick kiss to her lips. Probably just a coyote after the chickens. But they both knew it wasn't likely to be wildlife, not with the warning they'd received and the specific sound she'd heard. After Zane left, Abigail pulled on a robe and looked in on the children. Both were sleeping soundly, unaware of any danger. She closed their door quietly, then moved to the front window, peering out into the moonlit yard. She could just make out Zane's figure as he moved cautiously toward the barn and corral, rifle ready. The night was eerily still, no wind to mask sounds or movements. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a flash of movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the side of the barn, moving toward where Zane stood. Not one shadow, she realized with mounting dread, but two. Men, approaching from different directions. Without thinking, Abigail grabbed her father's old revolver from the drawer where she kept it and slipped out the back door. If she could circle around the chicken coop, she might be able to warn Zane without being seen. The grass was cool beneath her bare feet as she moved silently through the shadows. Years of living on the ranch had taught her every inch of the property, allowing her to navigate even in the dim light. She reached the chicken coop just as a sharp command rang out. "Hold it right there. Hands where I can see 'em." Peering around the edge of the coop, she saw Zane standing very still, rifle pointed at a man she didn't recognize. But the second man was no longer in her line of sight, which meant, "Drop the gun, mister, or your wife gets a bullet." The voice came from directly behind her, causing her heart to nearly stop. Slowly, she turned to find a rough-looking man holding a pistol aimed at her head. "Inside voice, lady," he growled when she opened her mouth. "You scream, you die. Now move." With the gun pressed to her back, Abigail had no choice but to walk forward into the open yard where Zane could see her. His face drained of color when he spotted them. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly calm despite the fear in his eyes. "She has nothing to do with this." "Drop the rifle first," the man holding Abigail ordered. For a tense moment, Zane didn't move. Then, slowly, he lowered the weapon to the ground. "Kick it away," the first man commanded. Zane complied, his gaze never leaving Abigail's face. "Now," the man behind her said, "we're gonna have a civilized conversation about those fine cattle of yours and how they're gonna take a little trip with us tomorrow." "Take them," Zane said immediately. "Take whatever you want. Just let my wife go." The rustlers exchanged glances, clearly surprised by his ready capitulation. "Zane, no," Abigail protested. "The cattle are just animals," he finished firmly. "You're what matters." The man holding her chuckled. "Ain't that sweet? But here's the thing, we need your help loading them up. Both of you. And then we need you to not raise the alarm for a good long while after we're gone." "So here's how it's gonna work," the first rustler continued. "You two are gonna spend the night tied up nice and secure in your barn. Tomorrow morning you help us round up those cattle and then you get tied up again while we disappear. By the time someone finds you, we'll be long gone." "And if we refuse?" Zane asked, though they all knew it wasn't really a question. The man shrugged. "Then we take the cattle anyway, but we leave 2 bodies behind instead of 2 live witnesses. Your choice." "We'll cooperate," Abigail said quickly before Zane could speak. "Just, our children are inside. They're very young. Please don't hurt them." "Children?" The rustler holding her seemed genuinely surprised. "Didn't know there were kids." "They're sleeping," she explained. 3 years and 10 months old. They won't wake up unless their mama doesn't come back to check on them," the man finished, a flicker of something perhaps decency crossing his weathered face. "We ain't monsters, lady. We don't harm children. Let me make sure they're all right before you tie us up," she pleaded. "Please." The rustlers exchanged another look, then the one holding her nodded. "Fine. But your husband stays here with my partner as insurance, and no tricks." "No tricks," she promised. With the rustler following close behind, Abigail returned to the house. She moved quietly to the children's room, relieved to find them both still sleeping peacefully. Elizabeth had kicked off her blanket as usual, and Abigail gently replaced it, allowing her hand to linger for a moment on her daughter's warm cheek. "They're fine," the rustler said from the doorway, his voice surprisingly soft. "Let's go." As they turned to leave, James stirred. "Mama," Abigail froze, her heart racing. The rustler tensed behind her. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart," she said, keeping her voice calm. "Everything's fine." "Want water?" the boy mumbled, half awake. "I'll bring you some. Just close your eyes for now." To her immense relief, James obeyed, his eyelids drooping shut. She exhaled shakily. "Cute kid," the rustler remarked as they left the room. "Looks like his pa." "Yes," she agreed, surprised by this moment of normal conversation amidst such danger. "He does. I got a son about his age," the man continued unexpectedly. "Haven't seen him in 8 months. Abigail didn't know how to respond to this confidence from a man who was threatening her family. She settled for silence as they returned to where Zane waited with the other rustler. True to their word, the men took them to the barn rather than harming them. They bound their hands and feet securely, though not cruelly tight, and left them sitting against the back wall with a lantern burning low nearby. "Someone will come looking for us eventually," Zane said after the rustlers had gone, leaving them alone in the quiet barn. "Mrs. Peterson is expecting us to bring her eggs tomorrow." "The children," Abigail whispered, tears finally coming now that immediate danger had passed. "If they wake up and we're not there, James knows not to leave the house without us," Zane reassured her. "And they'll be looking for us long before the children would be in any real danger." She nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. "I'm sorry I put myself in danger. I was trying to warn you." "Don't apologize for being brave," he said firmly. "Though next time, maybe stay inside with the loaded revolver instead of coming out unarmed." Despite everything, she found herself smiling at his gentle teasing. "Next time I'll shoot first and ask questions later. That's my girl." He shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position against the barn wall. "Try to get some sleep if you can. We'll need our wits about us in the morning." But sleep was impossible with worry for their children and uncertainty about what the morning would bring. Instead, they talked in low voices through the night, making plans and reassuring each other. As dawn approached, they heard movement outside the rustlers preparing for the day's work. The barn door swung open, and the man who had held Abigail at gunpoint entered. "Time to earn your keep," he announced, moving to untie their feet. "You cooperate, this goes smooth and easy for everyone." Under the rustlers' watchful eyes, Zane and Abigail helped round up the cattle from the nearest pasture. It was heartbreaking to see the animals they'd worked so hard to raise being driven away. But neither of them was willing to risk their lives or their children's safety for property that could be replaced. "That's the last of them," the lead rustler said as the final cow was herded into the makeshift pen they'd constructed. "Now back to the barn, nice and easy." As they walked, Abigail glanced toward the house, desperate for some sign that the children were all right. The curtains in their room were still drawn, suggesting they might still be asleep. She prayed that was the case. "Wait," the second rustler said suddenly, his gaze fixed on something beyond the corral. "Someone's coming." In the distance, a horse and rider were approaching fast along the road from town. "Sheriff," Zane murmured, recognizing the distinctive figure even at a distance. Everything happened very quickly then. The rustlers pushed Zane and Abigail roughly toward the barn, weapons drawn. But before they reached it, the sheriff's voice rang out. "Matthews, you there?" Abigail didn't think, she just acted. "Here, Sheriff, help," one of the rustlers cursed, raising his gun toward her. Zane moved instantly, throwing himself against the man and knocking the weapon aside. The shot went wild, but the sound was enough to alert the sheriff to trouble. The second rustler fired toward the approaching rider, forcing Sheriff Wilson to take cover. In the confusion, Abigail broke free and ran toward the house, desperate to reach the children before any stray bullets could endanger them. She burst through the door to find James standing in the hallway, eyes wide with fear. "Mama, what's that noise?" "Come here, sweetheart," she said, gathering him into her arms. "We need to stay inside for a bit." From the cradle, Elizabeth began to cry, awakened by the commotion. Abigail hurried to her, lifting the baby with her free arm and carrying both children to the far corner of the house, away from any windows. Outside, more shots were fired. Abigail held her children close, murmuring reassurances she didn't feel, praying for Zane's safety. Then silence. Terrible, absolute silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Finally, footsteps on the porch, the door opening. Abigail, Zane's voice. She nearly collapsed with relief. "Here," she called, her voice breaking. "We're here." He appeared in the doorway, a cut above his eye bleeding freely but otherwise appearing unharmed. Behind him stood Sheriff Wilson, looking grim but satisfied. "It's over," Zane said, crossing to embrace her and the children. "The rustlers are in custody. Both of them." She asked, remembering the shots. "Both alive," the sheriff confirmed. "Though one might be wishing otherwise when his leg heals. He'll have plenty of time to think about his choices in territorial prison." Later, after the sheriff had taken the rustlers to town and promised to return their cattle from where they'd been gathered, Abigail tended to Zane's cut in the kitchen. James sat at the table, unusually subdued, watching his parents with solemn eyes. "Did the bad men want to hurt us?" he asked suddenly. Abigail and Zane exchanged glances, unsure how to answer. "They wanted to take things that didn't belong to them," Zane said finally. "But they're gone now and they won't be coming back. Because you were brave," James persisted. "Because your mother was brave," Zane corrected, catching Abigail's hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "She's the real hero of this family." James considered this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. "Mama's always brave, like when she kills spiders for me." The simple comparison broke the tension, and they both laughed, the release of fear making the moment sweeter than it might otherwise have been. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet once more, Abigail found herself unable to rest. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind: the fear, the uncertainty, the moment when she'd thought she might lose everything she held dear. Without waking Zane, she slipped from bed and padded to the kitchen. Almost without conscious thought, she found herself gathering flour, yeast, salt, the ingredients for bread. The familiar ritual would settle her mind as it always had. As she kneaded the dough, working it with steady, rhythmic motions, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Zane leaning in the doorway, watching her with a tender expression. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, echoing the words he'd spoken on that fateful night 5 years ago. She smiled, recognizing the reference. "Not tonight." He crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Making bread helps, it always has." She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Ever since I was a girl, it's been my way of making sense of things." "I'm sorry about today," he murmured. "I should have protected you better." She turned in his arms to face him. "You did protect me. You protected all of us, but Zane, we protect each other. That's what partnership means." He touched her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "When I saw that gun pointed at you, I've never been so terrified in my life." "I know." She covered his hand with her own. "I felt the same when I heard the shots and didn't know if you were alive or dead." "Promise me something," he said, his voice intense. "Promise me you'll always be careful." "I couldn't bear to lose you, Abigail. You and the children are everything to me." "I promise," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "If you promise the same, I promise." They sealed their vows with a kiss, there in the quiet kitchen with the bread dough waiting on the counter, and the stars shining outside the window, a moment of perfect understanding between two people who had found in each other the healing they both desperately needed. In the years that followed, their ranch continued to prosper. 2 more children joined their family, twin boys, Thomas and Samuel, born on a snowy December night with Mrs. Peterson and the town doctor in attendance. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and Zane built a proper bunkhouse for the 2 hired hands they now employed to help with the increased workload. Beaver grew as well. the railroad finally reaching the town in 1880, bringing new opportunities for trade and commerce. Abigail started selling her bread and pies to the hotel that opened near the station, creating a small but steady additional income that she insisted on setting aside for the children's education. Through it all, the joys and sorrows, the successes and setbacks that make up any life, Abigail and Zane remained true to the partnership they had forged that spring day, when he had asked for her hand not out of pity or practicality, but out of love and respect. And sometimes, on nights when sleep proved elusive for one reason or another, they would meet in the kitchen in the small hours of the morning. She would make bread while he told stories or simply kept her company, the quiet intimacy of those moments a reminder of how their journey together had begun with a sleepless night, a lame horse, and an unexpected knock at the door. On their 10th anniversary, with the children safely in the care of Mrs. Peterson for the night, Zane surprised Abigail with a picnic under the stars, in the very spot where he had proposed. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Matthews," he said, pouring apple cider into 2 glasses and handing her one. "To 10 years of making bread at ungodly hours." She laughed, the sound as bright and clear as it had been when she was younger, though life had added wisdom to her eyes and a few silver strands to her hair. "And to 10 years of unexpected knocks at the door. Best thing that ever happened to me, that lame horse," he reflected, stretching out beside her on the blanket, "though at the time I was cursing my bad luck." "Funny how life works," she agreed. "The things we think are misfortunes often turn out to be blessings in disguise." He propped himself up on one elbow to look at her properly. At 40, Abigail Matthews was more beautiful to him than she had been at 30, her face now telling the story of their life together, laugh lines around her eyes, a small scar on her chin from when she'd fallen helping him mend the roof, the confidence that came from knowing she was loved completely and unconditionally. "Any regrets?" he asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question seriously, as she did all things. "Not about us," she said finally. "Never about us. I wish my father could have known you, could have seen the children. I wish your brother could have been at our wedding." "But those are wishes, not regrets," he nodded, understanding perfectly. "I feel the same. And you?" she asked. "Any regrets?" "Just one," he said, reaching for her hand. "That it took me 30 years to find you." She smiled, the same smile that had captivated him that first night in her kitchen. "Well, Mr. Matthews, I'd say we've made good use of the time since then." "Indeed we have, Mrs. Matthews, indeed we have." As they lay there beneath the vast Utah sky, the same stars watching over them that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the births of their children, and all the ordinary days in between, Abigail thought about the long journey from grief to joy. She thought about a young widow baking bread at 3 in the morning to quiet her troubled mind, and a trail-worn cowboy with gentle eyes asking if she couldn't sleep either. 2 lonely souls finding each other in the vast wilderness of loss. 2 broken hearts healing together. It wasn't the future she had imagined for herself when her father died, leaving her alone with a failing ranch and mounting debts. It was better, richer, deeper, more meaningful than anything she could have envisioned in those dark days. "What are you thinking about?" Zane asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how far we've come," she replied, "and how grateful I am for every step of the journey, even the painful ones." He pulled her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been a decade ago. "We've got a lot more journey ahead of us yet." "Promise? Promise," he said, sealing his vow with a kiss that held all the passion of their youth and all the hard-won wisdom of their years together. "I'm not going anywhere, Abigail Matthews. You're stuck with me till we're old and gray." "Good," she whispered against his lips. That's exactly where I want you to be. And as the night deepened around them, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient, patient dance, two people who had once been strangers but were now as essential to each other as breath itself held tight to the love they had built, a love that had begun with bread baking at an unseemly hour, and a simple question from a weary traveler who would soon become so much more.